Hi, Gabriel. Jeff Allen here. I saw your post up on LinkedIn yesterday about should translators have a degree or certification, and this is a really good question. It's been around forever, um, and there's a big debate about that, right? And you've already gone through some of the pros and cons you can think of such a requirement. On if there's quality regulation, or is there a higher barrier of entry, um, the supply, the potentially higher rates because of having extra certifications and all that, and the issue of competition and all that. But I want to bring up something that kind of an overall topic, which comes from, I mean, I've been talking a bit about the difference in the sports industry, the sports, but I'm going to call this the sports enterprise, okay, and in other areas. And one of the things, like in sports, there's always been this thing that you don't have to be too intelligent to be work in sports, right? It's been stigmatized by that. There are some that do get in there, and I think that's really stigmatized by the United States because of the cost of universities and people getting to go. A few people going to the universities that for expensive universities they get to go because they get a sports scholarship, but a lot of people are penalized because they can't go to it. So it's helped a few people go and get education, but it's penalized a lot of people from being able to go because the cost of education is so high in a lot of these universities because of the stadiums and stuff. And I know a lot of vice presidents of universities that tell me this, right? So it's because of the cost of the sports programs and the cost of the coach and all that, which can be more expensive than the president of the college and the university. But usually, I mean, why do you go to college? Is to get education, right? Not to get sports. And that's a whole debate is, why to go to university? But why do universities set up? And what is the purpose of getting a diploma or education? And the reality of things is that people with degrees tend to get better jobs than those that don't. So in pretty much most countries, I'm not saying that everyone always does with a higher degree, you're going to get a better salary. I'm not saying that. But if you compare those that don't go to school, and this is a Western point of view, and I understand that. And there's a lot of it. I made a bunch of videos on that too because I think that we've from some of the lesser developed countries we're forcing education and the concept of education onto those cultures which maybe they don't need, they've never needed, and that's done it through colonization, decolonization, all that. But if we look at it from, I want to make that statement first. But I think if we're going to be here talking about the situation with the translation industry in general, the language industry, is that there's a significantly high volume of workers with a varying amounts of experience and education, and that's created this whole competition thing, right? And that's caused the rates. That affects the rates. So, and if you look at it from, if we're looking for what are you going to train for quality, and I'm going to pull out the quality standard that we've got here. It used to be the 2006 European standard, which EN 15038, which then turned into the ISO 17101 for 2015. And what it says, and I remember using this when it's still the 15038, where when we were TransPerfect. But I'll go through and talk what it says. So it determines the professional skills of each of the service providers. That can be the translators, editors, proofreaders, managers involved in translation product, not interpretation. It says that this quality standard, 17100, requires translation agencies to work exclusively with qualified translators and proofreaders. So that when you get certified, you have to show that they're qualified. And to do so, they must, in addition to having 5 years of professional experience in translation, hold a state-recognized postgraduate diploma in translation or an equivalent qualification in another field, together with a minimum of 2 years professional experience in that field. Now, and then there are other, in addition to those requirements, the revisers also need to have experience in translation or editing, right? And then in order to meet the required specifications, they need to hold a high level of, these different workers need to have a high level of technical knowledge in their specialist areas to ensure the delivery of the translation. And then for those purposes, the mandatory for the agencies, which are certified through the standard, to have an up-to-date register of the professional skills required by the providers. And in addition, I recall that when I was at TransPerfect, Translation.com, when I was a business development director, we had another specific one, because we were looking at that, we were doing it under that when it was still the 15038, that if you could not have lived outside of a country that of your native language for more than 2 or 3 years, so that meant that it requires the native speaker to not to be living in a low-cost country. Okay, that's basically what it's doing, and saying that because you can have language attrition. I mean, I have this in my own English. I've lived in France for 35 years, so I have examples of language attrition where I forget things or all that. And what it's trying to do is that the standard saying at that point in time was that you didn't want to have people that were undergoing that. They want to make sure that you're constantly up on the current language, the current level of language of your native language. And that's another requirement. But looking at from the university question here of what's qualified mean, I think that the saying that you have to have a postgraduate diploma, which means postgraduate, you got to be careful because postgraduate in which country, but here they're probably talking about a postgraduate from the UK definition of that, meaning a bachelor's or higher, right? Or beyond a high school diploma. But you got to be careful because in the US, postgraduate means, graduate is it was bachelor's, and the postgraduate is higher than that higher than the bachelor's degree, so it's master's and higher. So that has to be qualified there, or at least has to be it's a little bit ambiguous. But the thing is, not everybody with a degree in translation is necessarily going to become a good translator. They've been trained, but a lot of the whole thing of the real question here is, are you a good translator and you're good in translation because you've got a translation degree? But they say here you can have an equivalent certification in another field. And like I had degrees in linguistics. I had degrees in teaching languages and degrees in linguistics. But it wasn't those. I mean, they helped. There was my meal ticket to get into the language and translation field. But what was the most, I think, contributing factor was doing other degrees in specialized areas, my specialized competencies in telecommunications, in IT, and in certain areas where I've worked. So I did the work and did the degrees at the same time, and that's what focused on the vocabulary and the knowledge of the content, right? That's really specialized degrees. Expertise is subject matter expertise, right? And this is what makes you a good communicator. Well, it's a contributing factor, and I think this is not what we're seeing here so much. I mean, what's an equivalent sort of qualification in another field? Now you're saying you have to have the high technical knowledge, high level technical knowledge, but can that cover for the number of the what's considered state recognized diploma? And I think that would be something if you are bilingual and you hold. I mean, truly bilingual here, whatever, that's kind of a subjective point too. But if you hold the degrees and the content, a diploma about the content, the subject matter, expertise, and you're able to explain that in one language, and you live in another language, then you have a lot higher chance of having better quality on the topic of translation than what a general translator with just a degree and doesn't know the topic, right? So there's a bit of this is where it's kind of a bit fuzzy. And I know a lot of people that have moved out of that had they have experience in software and they've got a lot of degrees in software and engineering, but they've got to decide to go into translation or technical writing because they know the topic really well, right? And that's what they become really good at because they're good communicators, right? So it's kind of a mixture of things here, and this is where there's a little bit of what they're saying is you need to have something. You need to have some kind of diploma. You need to have something to prove that you're able to work on a thing. Now the question is, if you did a degree in in HR and now you're working on telecom, that's gonna just because you get the degree doesn't mean you can work in that area, right? And but the advantage of this is that like I said, people with diplomas and degrees, and these can be there are different levels of types of training, right? You can have all kinds of certification too. There are all kinds of certification that you can do online and stuff. You don't have to do necessarily a diploma or a degree in a certain area. You can have some certificates of specialized things. I do a lot of things right at work, or you can do this on even on online platforms. This shows that you've gone through the programs and you've gained that knowledge. It helps on specialized areas, right? So I think that this is where it's really important to distinguish, the level of education that's going to allow for it and allow you to have that to prove that expertise. Because just the degree in translation, I've known people that finish it, but at the end they become they become general language translators, and their whole struggle is trying to get a job, trying to find jobs, and trying to things because they haven't got a specialized area, right? And that's where advantage for people I know that I've worked with in certain companies that they were bilingual and they got hired. They didn't have the degrees, but they learned the boilerplate templates, how to say things, right? And they just memorized it. They became human translation memories, right? But the experience, just doing it. And it's possible, and they became great translators in that specific area. But you could try to do it outside of the area, and they can do it, but it's not going to be as good because they've memorized it, right? They've memorized over a period of years. So I think it's a mixture of these things, but it does remove the kind of the wheat and the chaff, right? So this is this field is inundated. I remember flooded with people. I remember people down the hall. Your brother-in-law who can just speak another language. You can maybe now translate, right? Or secretaries. I've seen a lot of this where you just ask for bilingual assistants who can speak another language to become the translator, and that kind of go. They get flooded with this stuff, and they get requests, and then it's not their job, right? And so they're requested to do it, and they weren't, they're not really qualified to do that kind of job, right? Until they do a lot of experience with it, and this can be a deciding factor of bringing up that level of entry, and the level of entry is probably isn't a bad thing, and yes, it does deal with the pricing issue, and yes, it'll become more costly because. That's what it is. And the industry has been so focused, become so commodity based that it's brought down the prices. And the whole thing is about how to sell. I've given videos about how to sell better. But the issue is, if you want the quality, you have the people with expertise, you got to pay for that, right? And yes, it'll be more expensive. And in the end, people will go to other people. The buyers will go to other translators at lower cost, but those won't be going through agencies or stuff that are that, like I said, they've got certified, right? They're going to have some kind of certification, a recognized standard that they're following. So in the end, people will get their want, and people will buy cheap stuff. People will go buy cheap products anywhere online, and then when it breaks, you got to go buy another one that's got some that's been checked and stuff and tested. So we see this in other areas too. But this is a good question, and I think that we should I think that having people with some kind of degree or certifications, professional certificates or whatever, and proof of that is a good thing because it does focus on they've gone through the training, they've gone through things to show that they've got that and that knowledge to be able to do it. It does have to go through, at least have some, so going through some kind of translation. They don't have to necessarily have a full degree in translation, but they've gone through some certificates and go through that. That's a good thing, or some kind of ongoing training too. And that's like ATA and all these have these kinds of things to even keep your certification. So that's my thoughts on it. We'll see. Thanks.